The automotive world has just been rocked by a seismic announcement that will reshape the future of electric vehicle manufacturing in North America. Just moments ago, Volkswagen, one of the world's largest and most influential automakers, has made a decision that sends shockwaves through the American manufacturing sector and delivers a stunning blow to recent protectionist trade policies. The German automotive giant has officially announced that it is abandoning its planned expansion in the United States and instead will invest a staggering $7 billion to construct a massive Gigafactory in Canada. This isn't just another corporate relocation story. This is a defining moment that illustrates the unintended consequences of aggressive tariff policies and protectionist trade measures that were supposed to bring manufacturing jobs back to American soil. Let's set the stage for this unprecedented development. For years, the United States has positioned itself as the premier destination for automotive manufacturing in North America. Detroit became synonymous with the automobile industry, and even as manufacturing shifted and evolved, the United States maintained its position as a critical hub for vehicle production. When the electric vehicle revolution began accelerating, many assumed that America would naturally become the epicenter of this transformation. The government rolled out incentives, tax breaks, and subsidies designed to lure major manufacturers to build their next-generation facilities on American soil. Volkswagen itself had been in advanced discussions about establishing significant manufacturing presence in the United States, with multiple states competing aggressively to host what everyone knew would be a transformational investment. But then came the tariffs. The trade policies implemented were designed with a simple premise: make it more expensive to import vehicles and components, thereby forcing manufacturers to build their facilities in the United States to avoid those costs. The logic seemed straightforward. If you want to sell cars to American consumers, you should build those cars in America, employing American workers and contributing to American economic growth. On paper, it made perfect sense to those who championed these policies. In practice, however, the reality of global manufacturing and corporate decision-making proved far more complex than the simplistic models suggested. Volkswagen's announcement today represents the culmination of months of careful analysis, strategic planning, and ultimately a complete reversal of their North American strategy. According to sources close to the decision-making process, the tariff structure implemented by the current administration created such uncertainty and such significant cost implications that Volkswagen's executive board determined the United States was no longer a viable location for their planned Gigafactory. The tariffs weren't just affecting the import of finished vehicles, they extended to critical components, raw materials, and intermediate goods that are essential to electric vehicle manufacturing. Even if Volkswagen built a factory in the United States, they would still face substantial tariff-related costs on the components and materials they would need to import to keep that factory running. Canada, meanwhile, emerged as an increasingly attractive alternative. Our neighbor to the north offered something the United States suddenly couldn't provide: stability and predictability in trade policy. Canada maintains strong trade relationships with both the United States and the European Union. Canadian trade agreements provide manufacturers with access to crucial supply chains without the uncertainty of sudden tariff changes or trade policy shifts driven by political considerations rather than economic logic. For Volkswagen, this stability proved decisive. When you're making a $7 billion investment that will determine your competitive position for the next several decades, predictability matters more than almost anything else. The location Volkswagen has chosen for this Gigafactory is in Ontario, strategically positioned to serve both Canadian and American markets, despite the company's stated pivot away from US-based manufacturing. The irony here is delicious and devastating in equal measure. The facility will be close enough to the American border that Volkswagen will still be able to efficiently ship vehicles to American dealers and customers. They'll still sell cars to Americans. They'll still profit from the enormous American automotive market. But the jobs, the tax revenue, the economic multiplier effects, and the technological development will all happen on Canadian soil. The tariffs designed to force manufacturing into the United States have instead driven it to Canada, where Volkswagen will manufacture vehicles and then export them back to American consumers, who will ultimately bear the cost of those very same tariffs through higher vehicle prices. Let's talk about what this $7 billion investment actually means in practical terms. This isn't a modest assembly plant or a small-scale operation. This is a gigafactory in the truest sense of the word, designed to be one of the most advanced electric vehicle manufacturing facilities in the world. Volkswagen's plans call for a facility capable of producing at least 500,000 electric vehicles annually once it reaches full operational capacity. The factory will incorporate cutting-edge manufacturing technologies, including extensive automation, artificial intelligence-driven quality control systems, and integrated battery production capabilities. Unlike older automotive plants that relied heavily on manual labor, this facility will represent the future of automotive manufacturing, where human workers operate alongside sophisticated robotics and AI systems to achieve unprecedented levels of efficiency and quality. The employment implications are staggering. Volkswagen estimates the Gigafactory will directly create approximately 8,000 permanent jobs once fully operational. These aren't minimum wage positions. These are skilled manufacturing jobs, engineering positions, and technical roles that typically pay significantly above median wages. Beyond the direct employment, economic analysts estimate the facility will generate another 20,000 to 30,000 indirect jobs in the surrounding region through suppliers, service providers, and the general economic activity generated by having thousands of well-paid workers spending money in local communities. For Ontario, this represents a transformational economic development opportunity. For the American states that were competing for this same investment, it represents a devastating loss. The timing of this announcement could not be more pointed. It comes at a moment when the debate over trade policy and tariffs has reached a fever pitch in American political discourse. Proponents of aggressive tariff policies have consistently argued that short-term disruption and higher consumer costs are acceptable prices to pay for the long-term benefit of reshoring manufacturing jobs to the United States. They've painted a picture of American factories humming with activity, producing goods that were previously made overseas, creating employment opportunities for American workers who had been left behind by decades of globalization. This narrative has been politically powerful, resonating with communities that have watched their manufacturing bases erode over decades as companies moved production to lower-cost locations. But Volkswagen's decision today exposes the fundamental flaw in this narrative. The assumption underlying aggressive tariff policy is that companies have no choice but to manufacture in the United States if they want access to American consumers. The reality, as Volkswagen has just demonstrated, is far more nuanced. Companies have options, they have alternatives, and when the business environment in the United States becomes sufficiently uncertain or costly, they will exercise those options, even if it means walking away from what has historically been the world's most important automotive market from a manufacturing perspective. Canada's victory in securing this investment didn't happen by accident. The Canadian government has been actively courting electric vehicle manufacturers for years, recognizing that the transition to electric mobility represents a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reshape the automotive industry's geographic footprint. Canada has offered Volkswagen a comprehensive package of incentives, including tax breaks, infrastructure investments, and streamlined regulatory processes. But according to industry insiders, what really sealed the deal wasn't just the incentives, it was the stability. It was the certainty that the rules wouldn't change on a political whim. It was the confidence that supply chains wouldn't be suddenly disrupted by tariff announcements made via social media posts. For a company making a multi-billion-dollar investment with a decades-long time horizon, that stability is worth more than almost any financial incentive package. The broader implications of this decision extend far beyond Volkswagen and far beyond the automotive industry. This announcement sends a clear signal to every multinational corporation evaluating where to locate their next major manufacturing investment. It demonstrates that aggressive trade policies can backfire spectacularly, achieving the opposite of their intended effect. Rather than forcing companies to manufacture in the United States, these policies are pushing them to alternative locations where they can serve American consumers while avoiding the uncertainty and costs associated with the current American trade policy environment. Think about what this means for other automotive manufacturers who are currently evaluating their own North American strategies. General Motors, Ford, Stellantis, Toyota, Honda, Hyundai, and every other major automaker are watching this situation closely. They're seeing that Volkswagen, one of the most sophisticated and strategically savvy automotive companies in the world, has determined that Canada offers a better platform for electric vehicle manufacturing than the United States. They're seeing that you can build a state-of-the-art Gigafactory in Ontario and still effectively serve American customers. They're seeing that the tariff structure designed to force manufacturing into the United States has instead created a roadmap for manufacturing around the United States. The economic modeling that Volkswagen conducted before making this decision reveals some uncomfortable truths about the current tariff structure. According to analysts familiar with the company's internal projections, the combination of tariffs on imported components, uncertainty about future trade policy, and the comparative advantages offered by Canada created a situation where a US-based facility would have been significantly less profitable than a Canadian alternative. Even accounting for the fact that vehicles manufactured in Canada and exported to the United States would face import duties, the total cost structure of Canadian manufacturing was sufficiently attractive that Volkswagen determined it was the superior option. This isn't because Canadian labor is cheaper. In fact, manufacturing wages in Ontario are quite comparable to those in American automotive manufacturing centers. It's not because environmental regulations are lax. Canada has stringent environmental standards that in some cases exceed American requirements. The advantage comes from trade policy stability, access to reliable supply chains, and a regulatory environment that, while demanding, is at least predictable. For manufacturers operating on thin margins in an industry undergoing revolutionary technological change, predictability is precious. The battery supply chain considerations played a crucial role in Volkswagen's decision. Electric vehicle batteries require a complex array of raw materials and processed components, including lithium, cobalt, nickel, graphite, and sophisticated electronic control systems. These materials and components come from all over the world, and the ability to access them reliably and cost-effectively is critical to electric vehicle manufacturing competitiveness. Canada's trade relationships, particularly with key battery material suppliers, offer advantages that the current American trade policy environment simply doesn't match. Canada has been systematically building relationships with battery material suppliers, investing in domestic battery material processing capacity, and positioning itself as a critical node in the global electric vehicle supply chain. This strategic positioning is now paying dividends in the form of major manufacturing investments like Volkswagen's Gigafactory. The technology transfer implications of this decision are profound. When you build a cutting-edge manufacturing facility, you don't just create jobs and economic activity. You create a hub of expertise, innovation, and technological development. Engineers and technicians working at this facility will develop skills and knowledge that will make them among the most sought-after professionals in the rapidly evolving electric vehicle sector. Universities and technical colleges in the region will orient their programs to supply the talent pipeline this facility demands. Supplier networks will develop to support the factory's operations. Over time, an entire ecosystem of electric vehicle expertise will grow up around this facility, creating long-term competitive advantages that extend far beyond the factory itself. This is exactly the kind of industrial ecosystem development that American policymakers hoped tariffs would generate in the United States. Instead, it's happening in Canada. The Americans are getting the higher prices that tariffs inevitably generate. The Canadians are getting the jobs, the technology development, and the long-term economic benefits. From a policy perspective, it's difficult to imagine a more complete backfire. The political ramifications of this announcement will be intense. The tariff policies that contributed to Volkswagen's decision were justified as necessary measures to protect American manufacturing and bring jobs back to the United States. Supporters of these policies will now face the uncomfortable task of explaining how driving a $7 billion investment to Canada represents success. They'll likely argue that this is an isolated incident, that the broader policy is working, that short-term setbacks are inevitable when implementing major policy changes. But the numbers tell a different story. Multiple major manufacturers have now canceled or scaled back U.S. investment plans since the latest round of tariffs was implemented. Volkswagen's announcement is the highest profile example, but it's far from the only one. The American states that were competing for Volkswagen's Gigafactory are reeling from this news. Multiple governors had personally courted Volkswagen executives, offering increasingly generous incentive packages in hopes of landing what everyone recognized would be a transformational economic development project. The states involved had prepared detailed proposals showcasing their workforce capabilities, infrastructure advantages, and commitment to supporting advanced manufacturing. Some had already begun infrastructure improvements in anticipation of potentially hosting the facility. All of that effort, all of those resources, all of that preparation has now been rendered moot by a policy decision made in Washington that fundamentally altered the calculus for manufacturers evaluating where to invest. The irony is that the United States still has tremendous advantages for automotive manufacturing. It has a skilled workforce, sophisticated supply chains, world-class engineering talent, and the world's most valuable consumer market. None of those advantages have disappeared, but they've been overshadowed by policy uncertainty and tariff structures that make manufacturers nervous about committing billions of dollars to American facilities. When you combine inherent advantages with policy disadvantages, the policy disadvantages can overwhelm everything else, particularly for companies making investment decisions with multi-decade time horizons. Canada's automotive sector has been given a tremendous boost by this announcement. For years, Canadian policymakers worried that the automotive industry's center of gravity was shifting away from Canada toward the United States and Mexico. There were concerns that Canada would be left behind in the electric vehicle transition, relegated to manufacturing legacy internal combustion vehicles while the exciting new electric future happened elsewhere. Volkswagen's decision turns that narrative on its head. Suddenly, Canada isn't just relevant to the electric vehicle future, it's becoming central to it. Other manufacturers will look at Volkswagen's decision and reconsider their own Canadian options. Suppliers will relocate to be near this major new facility. The multiplier effects will extend throughout the Canadian economy. The environmental implications of this decision are also worth considering. Electric vehicles are critical to addressing climate change and reducing transportation sector emissions. The transition to electric mobility needs to happen quickly and at scale if we're going to meet our climate objectives. Manufacturing capacity is a key constraint on how quickly that transition can occur. By building this Gigafactory, Volkswagen will be adding significant production capacity for electric vehicles, which is good for the climate, regardless of where the factory is located. But there's a cruel irony here as well. The United States has set ambitious targets for electric vehicle adoption and emissions reductions. Achieving those targets requires massive expansion of domestic electric vehicle manufacturing capacity. Volkswagen's decision to locate this capacity in Canada rather than the United States makes America's climate objectives harder to achieve and Canada's easier. The consumer impact of this decision will manifest primarily through vehicle prices. American consumers who purchase electric vehicles manufactured in Canada will bear the cost of import tariffs through higher prices. These tariffs, remember, were supposed to incentivize domestic manufacturing that would ultimately benefit American consumers through more competitive pricing and greater product availability. Instead, consumers are getting higher prices without the benefit of domestic job creation. It's the worst of both worlds from a consumer perspective. They're paying the tariff-inflated prices, but those higher prices aren't supporting American jobs because the manufacturing is happening in Canada. Volkswagen's specific product plans for this facility are ambitious. The Gigafactory will produce multiple electric vehicle models across Volkswagen's various brands. This won't just be a single model facility. It will have the flexibility to manufacture different vehicles on the same production lines, allowing Volkswagen to respond to market demand and shift production between models as needed. This flexibility is characteristic of modern automotive manufacturing and represents a significant evolution from older facilities that were often dedicated to producing a single model. The vehicles produced will span multiple market segments, from compact cars to larger SUVs, ensuring that the facility operates at high capacity levels and serves diverse consumer preferences. The technological sophistication planned for this facility is remarkable. Volkswagen intends to incorporate Industry 4.0 principles throughout the factory, creating what amounts to a smart factory where systems communicate with each other, anticipate problems before they occur, and continuously optimize production processes. Artificial intelligence will monitor quality control, identifying defects that human inspectors might miss, and ensuring that every vehicle meets exacting standards. Digital twin technology will allow engineers to simulate and test production processes virtually before implementing them on the factory floor, reducing downtime and accelerating the pace of innovation. Advanced robotics will handle repetitive or physically demanding tasks, while human workers focus on oversight, problem solving, and continuous improvement. The battery production integration planned for this facility is particularly significant. Rather than sourcing batteries from external suppliers, Volkswagen will manufacture battery cells and packs on site. This vertical integration offers multiple advantages. It reduces transportation costs and logistics complexity. It allows for tighter quality control over one of the most critical and expensive components in an electric vehicle. It creates opportunities for continuous innovation in battery technology and manufacturing processes, and it generates additional high-value jobs beyond basic vehicle assembly. Battery manufacturing is knowledge-intensive and technologically sophisticated, representing exactly the kind of advanced manufacturing that countries compete aggressively to attract. The supply chain that will develop around this gigafactory will be extensive and economically significant. A facility of this scale requires hundreds of suppliers providing everything from sophisticated electronic components to basic fasteners and trim pieces. Many of these suppliers will establish operations near the gigafactory to minimize transportation costs and enable just-in-time delivery of components. This supplier ecosystem will generate thousands of additional jobs and create a dense network of economic activity centered on the automotive industry. Over time, this ecosystem becomes self-reinforcing. The presence of major suppliers attracts other manufacturers. The concentration of automotive expertise attracts engineering talent. The whole region benefits from being recognized as a center of automotive excellence. The timeline for this project is aggressive but achievable. Volkswagen plans to break ground on the facility within the next 6 months, with initial production beginning approximately 30 months after construction commences. Full operational capacity is expected to be reached roughly 4 years after the initial groundbreaking. This timeline is faster than traditional automotive plant construction, reflecting both the urgency Volkswagen feels about accelerating their electric vehicle production and the efficiencies that come from modern construction techniques and prefabricated components. The Canadian government has committed to expediting permitting and regulatory processes to ensure that bureaucracy doesn't slow the project down. The workforce development initiatives associated with this project are substantial. Recognizing that advanced manufacturing requires sophisticated skills, Volkswagen is partnering with Canadian educational institutions to develop training programs that will prepare workers for the demands of operating a state-of-the-art gigafactory. These programs will cover everything from basic manufacturing skills to advanced robotics operation, quality control techniques, and continuous improvement methodologies. The company has committed to recruiting locally and providing extensive training to ensure that the facility's workforce reflects the diversity of the surrounding communities. This investment in human capital will pay dividends long after the factory is built, creating a generation of workers with advanced manufacturing skills that will serve them throughout their careers. The infrastructure investments required to support this facility are significant and are being shared between Volkswagen and various levels of Canadian government. The factory will require substantial electrical power, necessitating upgrades to the local grid and potentially additional generation capacity. Water supply and wastewater treatment systems need to be expanded. Transportation infrastructure must be enhanced to handle the flow of incoming components and outgoing finished vehicles. All of these infrastructure improvements benefit not just the factory but the surrounding communities, creating lasting public assets that will support economic development for decades. The competitive dynamics this decision creates in the North American automotive market are fascinating. Volkswagen will be manufacturing electric vehicles in Canada while competing against manufacturers who have chosen to maintain or expand their American production capacity. Those American-based manufacturers may face higher costs due to tariffs on imported components, but they'll avoid the import duties on finished vehicles that Volkswagen will face. It's a complex equation where neither approach offers a clear-cut advantage, and success will depend on execution, efficiency, and the ability to navigate an uncertain trade policy environment. What's clear is that the competitive landscape has become more complicated, and manufacturers are increasingly factoring trade policy risk into their strategic planning in ways they didn't need to consider in the past. The message this sends to other industries extends far beyond automotive manufacturing. If aggressive tariff policies can drive a $7 billion automotive investment to Canada, what does that mean for other sectors evaluating major capital investments? Technology companies building data centers, renewable energy developers planning manufacturing facilities, pharmaceutical companies considering production capacity expansions, they're all watching this situation and drawing conclusions about what it means for their own strategic planning. The signal being sent is that the United States, despite its many advantages, has introduced enough policy uncertainty and tariff-related costs that alternatives deserve serious consideration. That's a dangerous message for a country that has long relied on being the default choice for major manufacturing investments. The European perspective on this situation is interesting. Volkswagen is, of course, a German company, and this decision was made by executives in Wolfsburg considering what's best for their shareholders and their company's competitive position. From a European standpoint, investing in Canada rather than the United States reduces exposure to American trade policy volatility while maintaining access to North American consumers. It positions Volkswagen to benefit from European-Canadian trade agreements while avoiding the complications of the current American tariff structure. This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we should expect from a sophisticated multinational corporation. But it's also exactly what American policymakers should have anticipated when implementing aggressive tariff policies. The Chinese automotive industry is watching this situation with great interest. Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers have been systematically building global manufacturing capacity, and they're actively evaluating where to establish their North American production presence. Volkswagen's decision to choose Canada over the United States provides valuable information about the relative attractiveness of these locations. It's entirely possible that Chinese manufacturers, who already face particular scrutiny and potential trade barriers in the American market, will follow Volkswagen's lead and establish Canadian manufacturing capacity that serves North American consumers while avoiding the complications of the current American trade environment. If that happens, the long-term consequences for American manufacturing competitiveness could be severe. As we process this stunning announcement and its implications, one question dominates: how did we get here? How did the United States, with all its advantages, with its massive consumer market, with its technological leadership, with its skilled workforce, end up driving a $7 billion investment to Canada through trade policies that were supposed to achieve exactly the opposite result? The answer is complex, involving political calculation, policy overconfidence, and a fundamental misunderstanding of how global manufacturers make investment decisions in an interconnected world economy. the assumption that aggressive tariffs would force manufacturers to choose American locations ignored the reality that manufacturers always have alternatives, and they'll exercise those alternatives when the business case demands it. The path forward from here is uncertain. American policymakers face a choice. They can double down on current policies, arguing that staying the course will eventually force manufacturers to accede to American demands. Or they can recognize that the current approach is counterproductive and seek a more nuanced strategy that leverages America's inherent advantages while creating a stable, predictable business environment that encourages rather than discourages major manufacturing investments. The political calculus of that choice is complicated, involving questions of credibility, consistency, and the difficulty of acknowledging that current policies aren't working as intended. What's certain is that Volkswagen's announcement today marks a turning point. It's the most visible, highest-profile example yet of tariff policies backfiring and achieving results opposite to their stated intentions. It's a $7 billion data point that demonstrates the real-world consequences of trade policy decisions, and it's a wake-up call that should prompt serious reflection about whether current approaches are actually serving American economic interests or undermining them. The automotive industry will never be the same. North American manufacturing geography is being redrawn, and Canada, through a combination of smart policy and American missteps, has landed one of the most significant manufacturing investments of the electric vehicle era. The reverberations from this decision will echo for decades to come.